There is a story that is not in the history books, a story older than Egypt, older than Sumer, older than any civilization we know, a story of a world that existed before us, more advanced, more connected, more ancient than academia is willing to admit. And that world was destroyed, not gradually, not through wars or decay, in a catastrophic event, 12,800 years ago, a comet, fire, ice, flood, the end of a world and the beginning of ours. The survivors of that cataclysm spread across the planet. Some reached Egypt, and we call them the Shemsu Hor. Others reached Ireland, and we call them the Tuatha Dé Danann. Others reached the Americas, and we call them Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl. Each culture remembered them differently, but all of them remembered. In myths, in monuments, in texts that survived millennia. This week, we explored those memories: Atlantis, Lemuria, Hyperborea, Tartaria, the Younger Dryas Event that destroyed everything, and the connection that links all these stories into one. Today, we put the pieces together, because separately they are legends. Together, they are proof. 12,800 years ago, the world ended. That's not metaphor, that's not exaggeration. One or more comets struck Earth. The explosion was equivalent to thousands of nuclear bombs. Fires swept entire continents. Dust blocked the sun. Temperatures dropped 25 degrees Fahrenheit in decades. Glaciers advanced. Oceans rose 400 feet. Entire species went extinct. Mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, giant sloths vanished almost overnight. And civilizations. Science says there were no advanced civilizations 12,800 years ago. But what if it's wrong? What if Atlantis, Lemuria, Hyperborea, all the legends of lost civilizations, were destroyed in that single event? This is the story of the Younger Dryas, the apocalypse that erased a world. Let's start with scientific facts. The Younger Dryas is a recognized climatic period. This isn't alternative theory, it's in the textbooks. Between approximately 12,900 and 11,700 years ago, Earth suffered an abrupt cooling. After thousands of years of gradual warming, the end of the Ice Age, temperatures suddenly dropped. How much? In Greenland, about 25 degrees Fahrenheit in less than a century. Perhaps in decades. That's a catastrophic change. Glaciers that were retreating advanced again. Climate reverted to Ice Age conditions. Species adapted to warming were decimated. The name Younger Dryas comes from a flower, Dryas octopetala, that grows in cold conditions. Its pollens suddenly appear in geological records from this period. The cause of the Younger Dryas was debated for decades. The dominant theory was fresh water. Glacial melting released enormous amounts of fresh water into the oceans. This disrupted ocean currents, especially the Gulf Stream. Climate cooled, seems reasonable. But there's a problem. Models can't replicate the speed and intensity of the change with fresh water alone. Something else happened. In 2007, a group of scientists proposed a revolutionary theory, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Led by Richard Firestone of Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, they proposed that a comet, or comet fragments, struck Earth about 12,800 years ago. The impact caused massive fires, extinctions, and triggered the Younger Dryas cooling. The theory was controversial. Many scientists rejected it, but evidence has been accumulating. At dozens of sites worldwide, North America, Europe, Middle East, there's a geological layer dated to about 12,800 years ago. This layer contains nanodiamonds, only form under extreme pressure like cosmic impacts, carbon spherules, droplets of melted material that cooled rapidly. Iridium, an element rare on Earth, but common in asteroids and comets, glassy carbon and sign of high-temperature fires. This black mat appears at more than 50 sites, same date, same materials. Coincidence or proof of impact? In 2018, a discovery strengthened the theory. An impact crater was found under Greenland's ice, the Hiawatha crater, 19 miles in diameter. Initial dating suggests it may be from the right era. Science still debates. There's no consensus, but there's increasing evidence that something struck Earth 12,800 years ago. If a comet struck Earth, what happened? Let's reconstruct the scenario. One or more comet fragments enter the atmosphere. There may have been multiple impacts at different locations. North America, Europe. The immediate explosion is catastrophic, equivalent to thousands of megatons of TNT, more powerful than all the world's nuclear arsenals combined. If it struck the North American ice cap, which at the time was miles thick, thousands of trillions of tons of water were vaporized instantly. The shock wave swept the continent. Fires started. North America was covered in forests. The heat from the explosion ignited everything. There's evidence of fires that covered about 10% of Earth's land surface. Dust and ash rose into the atmosphere, blocked the sun. Temperatures began to fall. The animals had no chance. North American megafauna, mammoths, mastodons, American horses, American camels, giant sloths, were decimated. The extinctions were rapid, too rapid for gradual climate change, but consistent with sudden catastrophe. And humans, the Clovis culture, the first known Americans, disappears from the archaeological record at exactly this time, not gradually. Suddenly, there's another consequence of the impact that interests us: water. If a comet struck the ice caps, it melted unimaginable quantities of ice almost instantly. All that water had to go somewhere, into the oceans. Sea level at the time was about 400 feet lower than today. Vast coastal areas, now submerged, were dry land. The impact may have dramatically accelerated sea level rise, not gradually over centuries, rapidly, perhaps in years or decades. Imagine, if you lived in a coastal civilization, and almost all great civilizations were coastal, you watched the sea rise meters in a few years. Cities submerged, agricultural lands lost, populations forced to flee. Sound familiar? Every ancient culture has flood myths. Noah in the Bible, Utnapishtim in Mesopotamia, Deucalion in Greece, Nuwa in China, Manu in India. More than 500 flood myths in cultures worldwide. The mainstream explanation? It's an archetype. All cultures live near rivers, rivers flood, therefore flood myths. The alternative explanation? It's memory. Memory of a real event. 12,800 years ago, when the sea rose and the world as they knew it was destroyed. Now we reach the crucial question. Science says there were no advanced civilizations 12,800 years ago. Humans were hunter-gatherers. We only developed agriculture around 10,000 BC. But what if science is looking in the wrong place? If a global coastal civilization existed, and all great civilizations are coastal, it would today be under 400 feet of water. We don't search there. We barely have technology to explore. What archaeology finds are the survivors, the inland communities that escaped, those who fled to high ground. Imagine current human civilization. If sea level rose 400 feet, we'd lose New York, London, Tokyo, Shanghai, Mumbai, almost every major city. What would remain? Rural communities in the mountains, with fragments of knowledge, trying to rebuild. That's exactly what the myths describe. Survivors of a cataclysm, bearers of knowledge, who arrive among simpler peoples and civilize them. Osiris in Egypt, Viracocha in the Andes, Oannes in Mesopotamia, the Tuatha Dé Danann in Ireland, all described as coming from outside, from a destroyed place, bringing knowledge, not gods, survivors, from Atlantis, from Lemuria, from Hyperborea, destroyed in a single event, 12,800 years ago. Is there proof that an advanced civilization existed before the Younger Dryas? Direct proof, no, but there are anomalies. Göbekli Tepe, in Turkey, a complex of monumental temples, dated to 11,600 years, right after the Younger Dryas, built by hunter-gatherers. How did hunter-gatherers organize thousands of workers, develop sophisticated construction techniques, create complex art, apparently from nothing? The alternative explanation: they didn't develop from nothing. They inherited from cataclysm survivors. Göbekli Tepe may be the first attempt at reconstruction, at preserving knowledge that was being lost. There's more. The Serapeum at Saqqara, in Egypt, granite boxes weighing 70 tons, with precision of fractions of a millimeter, technically impossible to make with Egyptian tools. The pyramids, with precise astronomical alignments, with engineering that defies conventional explanation. Pumapunku, in Bolivia, andesite blocks fitted with mechanical perfection. The mainstream explanation: we underestimate the ancients. The alternative explanation: the ancients inherited knowledge from even more ancient peoples. There's one last question: can it happen again? The comet that struck Earth 12,800 years ago was probably part of a swarm. The Taurids, a stream of cosmic debris that Earth crosses twice a year. Within that swarm are large objects, potentially dangerous. Some researchers warn Earth crosses the densest part of the Taurids approximately every 3,000 years, 12,800 years ago, 9,800 years ago, 6,800 years ago, 3,800 years ago. Each of these dates corresponds to periods of climate instability and civilizational disruption in the historical record. The Bronze Age collapse, about 3,200 years ago, may have had cosmic contribution. And the next passage: we're in it, or near it. I'm not making apocalyptic predictions. The probability of impact is low in any given year. But the pattern exists, and history suggests civilizations can fall rapidly when nature decides. 12,800 years ago, something struck Earth. Science debates the details, but evidence of impact is accumulating. Civilizations were destroyed, species went extinct, the world changed, the survivors spread out, became the gods of subsequent cultures, founded Egypt, Sumer, the civilizations we know, Atlantis, Lemuria, Hyperborea, Tartaria. Not myths, memories, of a world before the flood, of an era that was erased. We don't know everything we lost, but we're beginning to discover. This week we explored the lost civilizations. From Atlantis to the lands of the blonde gods, all point to the same event, the same moment, the same apocalypse, the Younger Dryas, the day the world ended, and the day our world began. Everyone knows Atlantis, a powerful island civilization, advanced technology, destroyed in a single day and night, sunk beneath the waves. But here's what most people don't know. We have the original source. We know exactly what was written, and almost no one has actually read it. Atlantis comes from one man, Plato. Two dialogues written around 360 BC, the Timaeus and the Critias. That's it. That's the entire ancient source. Everything else and every theory, every location, every documentary is interpretation. So what did Plato actually say? Where did he claim Atlantis was? And did he mean it literally, or was it something else entirely? This is Atlantis as it was written, not the legend. The source. Let's go to the source. In the Timaeus, Plato has a character named Critias tell a story. Critias claims his grandfather heard it from the Athenian statesman Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais. Already we're 3 generations removed from the supposed source. According to the priests, 9,000 years before Solon's time, roughly 9600 BC, there was a great island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The Pillars of Hercules is the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar, so Atlantis was in the Atlantic Ocean. Plato is explicit about this. The island was larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, a massive landmass. The Atlanteans were powerful. They controlled parts of Africa and Europe. They had a vast navy. Then they attacked Athens. And here's where it gets interesting. The Athenians alone defeated them. After this, there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis disappeared into the depths of the sea. That's the Timaeus account. The Critias gives more detail. In the Critias, Plato describes Atlantis in extraordinary detail. The god Poseidon created it for his mortal lover, Cleito. He shaped the island with alternating rings of sea and land, 3 rings of water, 2 of land, surrounding a central hill where Cleito lived. The Atlanteans built on this foundation. They constructed bridges across the water rings. They carved tunnels large enough for ships. They covered buildings with bronze, tin, and the mysterious metal orichalcum, which sparkled like fire. The central island had a temple to Poseidon covered in silver with golden statues inside. There were hot and cold springs, gardens, harbors filled with ships, a standing army of 1.2 million men. The kings of Atlantis met every 5 or 6 years to judge matters of state and to sacrifice bulls to Poseidon. For many generations, they were virtuous. They despised everything but virtue. But eventually the divine portion began to fade away, and they became full of avarice and unrighteous power. Zeus, seeing their corruption, decided to punish them, and here Plato's Critias simply stops. It's unfinished. We never get Zeus's judgment. We never get the destruction scene. Just silence. So did Atlantis exist? Most classical scholars say no, and they have reasons. First, the source chain. Critias heard from his grandfather, who heard from Solon, who heard from Egyptian priests. This is how myths are transmitted, not historical records. Second, the timing. 9,000 years before Solon puts Atlantis at 9600 BC, before agriculture, before cities, before writing. Yet Plato describes Atlantis with bronze, ships, armies, writing, and architecture. This is anachronistic. It doesn't match what we know about 9600 BC. Third, the purpose. Plato wasn't a historian, he was a philosopher. The Atlantis story appears in dialogues about ideal societies and moral decay. Atlantis is described as a perfect society that became corrupted and was destroyed for its hubris. Athens, by contrast, is virtuous and triumphs. Many scholars believe Atlantis is a philosophical allegory, a warning about the corruption of ideal states, not history, teaching tool. Fourth, the geography. No island continent exists in the Atlantic. None has ever existed in human history. Geology confirms this. There is no sunken landmass beyond the Pillars of Hercules. For literal Atlantis believers, this is a problem. But not everyone dismisses Atlantis. Some argue Plato was recording a genuine tradition, perhaps distorted but based on something real. What if the 9,000 years was a translation error? What if it should be 900 years, putting Atlantis around 1500 BC? This aligns with one of the most popular theories. Atlantis was Minoan Crete. Around 1600 BC, the volcanic island of Thera, modern Santorini, exploded in one of the largest eruptions in human history. The explosion devastated Minoan civilization. Tsunamis swept the coast. Ash darkened the sky. The Minoans were an advanced maritime civilization. They had writing, art, plumbing, multi-story buildings, and they collapsed shortly after the eruption. Could memories of this catastrophe, transmitted through Egypt, have become Plato's Atlantis? The details don't match perfectly. Crete isn't in the Atlantic, it didn't sink. But myths change over time, details shift. The core, a great civilization destroyed by natural disaster, might be preserved. Other candidates, the Eye of the Sahara, the Risha structure in Mauritania, looks remarkably like Plato's concentric rings from satellite images. Antarctica, some claim Atlantis lies beneath the ice, pointing to the Piri Reis map. The Azores, the Caribbean, Spain, Morocco, all have been proposed. None have definitive evidence, but the search continues. Here's what's strange. Plato's date, 9600 BC, matches the end of the last ice age. This is when massive flooding occurred worldwide. Sea levels rose over 100 meters. Coastlines where humans likely lived were submerged. Is it possible that genuine memories of Ice Age catastrophes were preserved in myth? The flood myth appears in virtually every ancient culture. Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, China, the Americas, the Pacific Islands, all describe a great flood that destroyed an earlier world. Graham Hancock and others argue this isn't coincidence. They propose a lost civilization, perhaps multiple settlements, existed during the Ice Age and was destroyed by the cataclysms around 10,800 BC. Survivors spread out, carrying knowledge and stories. Over millennia, these stories became myths. The myths became legends. The legends reached Plato. Under this theory, Atlantis isn't one specific place. It's a memory, a fragmented, distorted, but real, of a world before the flood. Göbekli Tepe proves sophisticated construction existed 12,000 years ago. What else might have existed that we haven't found, or that sank beneath the waves? Let's be honest about what we know and don't know. We know Plato wrote about Atlantis. We know he placed it beyond Gibraltar, described it as a massive island, and said it was destroyed 9,000 years before Solon. We know no such island exists or has ever existed in the Atlantic. We don't know if Plato intended Atlantis literally or allegorically. We don't know if he drew on older traditions or invented the story. We don't know if distorted memories of real events, Thera, Ice Age floods, something else, contributed to the account. What we know is that for 2,400 years, Atlantis has fascinated humanity. Explorers have searched for it. Scholars have debated it. Dreamers have imagined it. Something about the story resonates. The idea of a great civilization, powerful and advanced, destroyed by its own hubris or by forces beyond its control. Maybe that's the real lesson. Whether Atlantis was real or not, it tells us something true about how civilizations rise and fall, and perhaps that's why we can't let it go. Atlantis. One man wrote about it. 2 dialogues. 2,400 years ago. And we're still searching. Maybe it's under the Atlantic, maybe it's under the ice, maybe it's a memory of the Minoans, or the Ice Age, or something we haven't imagined yet. Or maybe it never existed at all, just a philosopher's story that took on a life of its own. Either way, the search reveals something about us. We want to believe there was something before, something greater, something lost, and maybe there was. The ocean keeps its secrets. The past doesn't give up its dead easily, but we keep looking, we always will. Everyone knows Atlantis, but there was another, a continent in the Pacific, larger than Atlantis, older, more spiritually advanced. Its inhabitants didn't need technology as we know it. They communicated telepathically, manipulated energy with thought, lived in perfect harmony with the universe. Then it vanished, not slowly, all at once, swallowed by the ocean. And while Atlantis left traces, myths, ruins, memories, Lemuria was erased, almost as if someone wanted us to forget. This is the story of the lost continent of the Pacific. The name Lemuria has a strange origin. In 1864, zoologist Philip Sclater was trying to solve a puzzle. Lemurs existed in Madagascar and India, but not in Africa or the Middle East. How did identical animals reach places separated by oceans? His theory, a continent once connected these places. He called it Lemuria, the land of lemurs. Modern science rejected the idea. Plate tectonics explains animal distribution differently, but the idea of Lemuria didn't die. On the contrary, it took on a life of its own. Helena Blavatsky, founder of Theosophy, seized the concept. In her works, Lemuria became something much greater, not just a continent and a civilization. The third root race of humanity, beings 12 feet tall, with a functional third eye, capable of feats we'd call magic. Fantasy from a 19th century occultist? Perhaps. But there's something strange. Pacific traditions tell very similar stories, and they existed long before Blavatsky was born. The peoples of the Pacific have memories of a lost land. Hawaiians speak of Mu, an ancestral land to the west from which their ancestors came, a land that sank. The Maori of New Zealand have legends of Hawaii, not modern Hawaii, but an original land, a spiritual homeland that no longer exists. Easter Island inhabitants, isolated in the middle of nowhere, say they came from a land called Hiva, a land destroyed by cataclysm. Their ancestors fled to the island before Hiva disappeared. The Caroline Islands, Fiji, Tonga, all have variations of the same story. An ancestral land, a paradise, destroyed, sunken. Coincidence or collective memory of something real? James Churchward, a British writer from the early 20th century, claimed to have seen proof. He said monks in India showed him Narkal tablets, ancient records of Mu. According to Churchward, Mu was a vast continent in the Pacific. It had 64 million inhabitants. Its civilization lasted 50,000 years. They were the ancestors of all great cultures: Egypt, Mesopotamia, Central America. The Narkal tablets were never found by anyone else. Churchward may have invented everything, but the Pacific myths weren't invented by him. They'd existed for centuries, and they all point in the same direction. If Lemuria existed, there should be traces. And some say there are. In 1986, a Japanese diver found something strange near Yonaguni Island, Japan. Submerged structures. They look like giant steps, platforms, right angles. The Yonaguni monument sparked intense debate. Natural formation, or ruins of a lost civilization. Mainstream says natural, rock that fractured into geometric patterns. Alternative researchers say impossible. The angles are too precise. There are what appear to be roads, terraces, a carved face. If artificial, it's between 8,000 and 10,000 years old. An era when, supposedly, humans didn't build structures like this. And Yonaguni isn't alone. There are submerged structures in the Bahamas, the famous Bimini Road. There are underwater ruins off the coast of India, Dwarka, the legendary city of Krishna. There are structures in the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, everywhere. Sea level rose 400 feet since the last ice age. What's submerged that we haven't found yet? Critics say natural formations, or more recent constructions that sank due to earthquakes. But there's a pattern. Ancient submerged structures worldwide, as if a global coastal civilization was swallowed by the sea. If Lemuria existed, what kind of civilization was it? Here we enter speculative territory. But the traditions are consistent. Lemuria wasn't a technological civilization like Atlantis. It was a spiritual civilization. Lemurians, according to traditions, developed internal capabilities. They didn't need machines because they could do with the mind what we do with technology. Telepathy, communication without words, levitation, movement without physical effort, energy healing, manipulation of life force, clairvoyance, vision beyond the physical. Sounds like fantasy? Maybe. But there's something interesting. The oldest spiritual traditions, one from India, Tibet, Polynesia, all speak of these capabilities. Not as fiction, as techniques that can be developed. Indian yogis speak of siddhis, powers that arise from deep meditation. Levitation, telepathy, bilocation. Hawaiian kahunas had energy healing practices that baffled Western missionaries. Australian Aborigines speak of dream time, a parallel dimension accessible through altered states of consciousness. What if these traditions preserve fragments of Lemurian knowledge? What if Lemuria was a civilization that developed the interior instead of the exterior? While Atlantis built machines, Lemuria built consciousness. All legends agree on one point. Lemuria fell, not by invasion, not by war, by cataclysm. Versions vary. Earthquakes, volcanoes, the continent itself sinking beneath the waters. Some traditions say the Lemurians knew it would happen, that their seers foresaw it, that there was time for some to escape. Where did they go? Traditions point to several places. Some went west, to India, to Africa. They're the ancestors of Dravidian peoples, of Australian Aborigines. Some went east, to the Americas. Some link Lemuria to Central American mysteries. Some stayed on the islands that remained, the peaks of Lemurian mountains that didn't sink. Hawaii, Easter Island, Fiji. And some, the more esoteric traditions say, went below. They didn't die. They retreated to underground cities, like the Tuatha Dé Danann in Ireland. The pattern repeats. Advanced civilization, cataclysm, survivors who become gods to the peoples they encounter. Retreat underground or into myth. Lemuria doesn't exist in isolation. It connects to everything we've been exploring. The Tuatha Dé Danann came from islands in the north that sank. Hyperborea. Sumerian myths speak of beings who came from outside. Who taught knowledge? Egyptians speak of Zep-Tepi, when gods ruled directly. Greeks speak of a lost golden age, and Pacific peoples speak of Lemuria. What happened 12,000 years ago? Something destroyed civilizations across the planet. At the same time, Atlantis, Lemuria, perhaps others we don't even know. The survivors spread out, became the civilizing gods of all continents. They brought knowledge, they brought memories, they brought genetics, and they left us myths. Myths we dismiss as fantasy, but which may be the oldest memory we have. In the next video, I'll talk about another lost continent, one that appears on ancient maps, one that official history erased, Tartaria. And that story is even stranger. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Did Lemuria exist? I don't know. No one knows for certain. What I know is that peoples separated by thousands of miles tell the same story. An ancestral land in the Pacific, destroyed by cataclysm, from which their ancestors fled. Coincidence? Psychological archetype? Or real memory? The Yonaguni structures are there, submerged, awaiting explanation. Pacific spiritual traditions preserve strange knowledge, and sea level rose 400 feet since the Ice Age. How much of our history is underwater? Lemuria may be myth, or it may be the key to a past we haven't yet discovered. Thanks for staying until the end. If this made you think, subscribe, there's much more to discover. See you in the next one. The ancient Greeks spoke of a perfect land. It lay beyond the north wind, beyond Boreas. That's why they called it Hyperborea, a land where the sun never set, where there was no disease, where inhabitants lived 1,000 years. The Greeks said Apollo, the sun god, spent his winters there. Myth, fantasy, allegory, perhaps. But the Vikings spoke of something similar. The Hindus too, the Persians too. All northern peoples have memory of an ancestral land, at the top of the world. Perfect, lost. What if Hyperborea had existed? What if the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Norse gods, the mysterious blue-eyed civilizers who appear in every culture, came from there? This is the story of Hyperborea, the original homeland of the gods. The Greeks had certainties about Hyperborea. Herodotus, the father of history, wrote about it. He said he didn't know if it existed, but that other Greeks firmly believed. Pindar, the great poet, described it in detail, a blessed place. Without disease, without old age, without hard labor, Hyperboreans spent their days in festivals and music. Apollo was especially connected to Hyperborea. It was said his temple at Delphi was founded by Hyperboreans, that Hyperborean priestesses regularly brought offerings. There's a strange story. Sacred offerings were sent from Hyperborea to the island of Delos, Apollo's birthplace. They passed from people to people until they arrived. This suggests a real route, real trade, with a real place in the north, but where? The Greeks were vague. Beyond the north wind, where the sun never sets. Some scholars say it was Scandinavia, others Siberia, others Britain. But there's another possibility. What if Hyperborea was further north? What if it was in the Arctic itself? The idea of a civilization in the Arctic seems absurd. Today the Arctic is ice, frozen desert, uninhabitable. But it wasn't always so. During warmer periods in Earth's history, the Arctic had temperate climate. There are fossils of tropical forests in Alaska. There are traces of abundant life on Arctic islands. The theory is this. Long ago, perhaps 12,000 years, perhaps more, the Arctic was habitable. A civilization flourished there. When the climate changed, they were forced to migrate south. They became the civilizing gods of the cultures they encountered. The Hindus have texts that seem to support this. The Vedas, India's oldest texts, describe the ancestral homeland of the Aryans. It was in the north. It had 6-month days and 6-month nights. This is an exact description of the Arctic. Bal Gangadhar Tilak, a 19th century Indian scholar, wrote The Arctic Home in the Vedas. He argued that ancient Hindus came from the Arctic, that the Vedas preserve memory of that time. The Persians had similar myths. Aryanam Vaja, the ancestral land, was in the far north. It was perfect until winter destroyed it. Coincidence that such distant peoples have such similar memories? If Hyperborea existed, who were the Hyperboreans? Ancient descriptions are consistent: tall, blonde, light-eyed, long-lived, wise. Sound familiar? The Tuatha Dé Danann, the gods who ruled Ireland, came from islands in the north. They were described as tall, beautiful, with extraordinary powers. The Norse gods, the Aesir, lived in Asgard, in the north. They were blonde, powerful, nearly immortal. The mysterious civilizers who appear in myths worldwide, Viracocha in the Andes, Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Oans in Mesopotamia, are often described as tall, light-skinned, bearded. Different from the peoples they taught. There's a pattern. Beings from the north, distinct appearance, knowledge bearers. who arrive after catastrophes, who civilize, and then leave or disappear. What if they all came from the same place? What if Hyperborea was that place? The homeland of the gods who spread across the world when their land was destroyed. What happened to Hyperborea? If it existed, why doesn't it exist now? The answer may lie in climate. About 12,800 years ago, Earth suffered a catastrophic change, the Younger Dryas Event. Temperatures dropped abruptly, glaciers advanced. The world changed, but before that there was another change, a shift in Earth's axis. Some researchers propose that Earth suffered crustal displacement. The Earth's crust slid over the mantle. What was in the Arctic moved to lower latitudes. What was in temperate climates moved to the Arctic. If this happened, Hyperborea, as a temperate land at the top of the world, would have been suddenly frozen. The inhabitants had to flee. Quickly, they migrated south, brought their knowledge, became the founders of civilizations we know. Egypt, Sumer, Indus Valley. All appear from nowhere with advanced knowledge. Mainstream theory says they developed that knowledge gradually. Alternative theory says they inherited it from somewhere. Hyperborea. Is there evidence of Hyperborea? Direct evidence, no. There are no ruins in the Arctic. Or are there? In 2007, a Russian expedition descended to the bottom of the sea at the North Pole. They placed a flag, but they also found something strange. Formations on the seabed that some say look like structures. It's not proof, it's curiosity. More interesting are the old maps. Mercator's 1595 map shows the Arctic in detail, not as frozen ocean, but as continent, with 4 large islands around a central sea, with a mountain in the middle. How did Mercator know what was in the Arctic in 1595? No one had been there. Mercator said he copied from older maps, lost maps. That showed the world before the ice. Truth? Fantasy? We don't know. The Piri Reis map, which we've already explored, shows Antarctica without ice, another polar continent mapped before being discovered. There's a pattern of ancient knowledge about the poles, knowledge that shouldn't exist. And there are the traditions, the myths of all northern peoples point in the same direction, an ancestral land, at the top of the world, lost long ago. Collective memory of Hyperborea? Everything we've been exploring connects here. The Tuatha Dé Danann came from islands in the north that sank. The Norse gods lived in Asgard, in the far north. The Vedic Aryans had memory of an Arctic homeland. The Greeks spoke of Hyperborea, coincidence or fragmented memory of the same place. And the Anunnaki? If they came from outside, from the sky, from elsewhere, where did they land? Where did they establish themselves? Some say the north was the original base, Hyperborea, from which they spread across the world. When Hyperborea fell, by climate change, by cataclysm, by the Dryas event, the survivors became the gods of every culture. One origin, multiple memories, fragmented by time. In the next video, I'll talk about the event that may have destroyed everything, the Younger Dryas, 12,800 years ago, when a comet struck Earth and changed history forever. Did Hyperborea exist? I can't prove it did, but there are too many coincidences to ignore. Peoples across the north with identical memories, ancient maps showing lands they shouldn't have known, civilizing gods appearing worldwide from the north, with similar appearance and knowledge. Something existed in the north, something was lost, and something survived. In myths, in memories, perhaps in bloodlines. Hyperborea may be myth, or it may be the key to understanding where we really came from. I'm going to show you something. A map from 1754, official. From a French encyclopedia. Half of Asia is occupied by an empire. Grande Tartaria, capital Genghis Khan, meaning the city of Genghis Khan. This empire occupies more territory than Russia, China and India combined. Now open a history book. Search for Tartaria. It's not there. An empire larger than any other, on official maps for centuries. And it disappeared from history books. How do you erase an empire? Who erased it and why? This is the story of Tartaria. Let's start with facts. Old maps show Tartaria. This isn't theory, it's verifiable fact. Diderot's Encyclopédie, 1754. Tartaria is there. British maps from the 18th century. Tartaria is there. Portuguese, Spanish, French maps. Tartaria is everywhere. Grande Tartarie occupied what is now Siberia, Mongolia, parts of China, Central Asia. Little Tartary was near the Black Sea. There was Chinese Tartary, independent Tartary, Muscovite Tartary. It wasn't a vague term for unknown lands. The maps are detailed. They show cities, rivers, borders. So, what happened? The official explanation is simple. Tartaria was just the European name for lands inhabited by Turco-Mongolic peoples. When Russia and China conquered those regions, the name fell out of use. Seems reasonable, but some say the story is much stranger. The alternative theory of Tartaria goes far. Very far. According to this theory, Tartaria wasn't just a geographic name, it was an advanced civilization, a global empire. With technology we don't understand. Proponents point to several clues. First, architecture. Look at old buildings around the world. San Francisco, Melbourne, St. Petersburg, cities throughout North America and Europe, grand buildings with domes, with perfect proportions, with intricate details. The theory says, these buildings weren't built by us, they're Tartarian. They survived a cataclysm, they were adopted, and history was rewritten. Second, World's Fairs. In the late 19th century, there were world exhibitions in Chicago, San Francisco, St. Louis, with monumental buildings, supposedly built as temporary structures. The theory asks, how did they build enormous palaces in months, only to demolish them afterward? Does that make sense? Or did they already exist and were destroyed on purpose? Third, old photographs. There are photographs of 19th century cities with grand buildings and empty streets, almost no people, as if the cities were new or newly recovered. Critics say long exposure times. People moved, didn't appear in the photo. Technical explanation. Alternative researchers say too many cities, too empty. Is it conspiracy theory, internet fantasy, or are there legitimate questions? The heart of Tartaria theory is the reset. The idea is this: in the 19th century, there was a global cataclysm. It may have been war, may have been natural disaster, may have been something worse. Tartaria, the advanced civilization that dominated much of the world, was destroyed. The survivors, with reduced numbers, were subjugated by emerging powers: British Empire, Russia, European elites. History was rewritten. Tartaria was erased. The buildings that survived were claimed as ours. There are variations of the theory. Some speak of mud flood, a catastrophic event that buried the first floor of many buildings. That's why so many old buildings have half-buried windows, basements that seem to have been ground floors. Some speak of free energy, the idea that Tartarian buildings generated energy from the atmosphere. The domes and towers were antennas. The technology was suppressed to maintain control. Some speak of orphanages full of Tartarian children, the original population decimated, the children redistributed, the memory erased. This is a lot to accept. And it's fair to ask, where's the proof? There are no Tartarian documents, no testimonies, no recovered technology. Or is there, and we don't recognize it? I'll be honest. Tartaria theory has problems. First, lack of documentary evidence. If Tartaria was an advanced global empire, where are its writings, its laws, its records, all destroyed, across the entire planet? Second, architecture has explanation. Beaux-Arts and neoclassical styles were popular in the 19th century. Architects studied in Paris, Rome. They copied ancient styles. There were efficient construction techniques. It's not mystery. It's architectural history. Third, World's Fairs are documented. There are plans, designs, construction records, photographs of the process. The buildings were made of temporary materials, plaster over wooden structures. They looked grand but weren't permanent. Fourth, empty photographs. Long exposure times really did erase moving people. There are photographs from the same era with people, when they stood still. Mainstream theory is that Tartaria as advanced civilization is an internet myth. It started in Russian forums, spread, took on a life of its own. I agree there are exaggerations in the theory. There are logical leaps. There's pareidolia, seeing patterns where none exist. But there are questions that deserve answers. Why did a name that appeared on every map for centuries completely disappear? Yes, Tartaria may have been just a geographic term, but maps show it as a political entity, with borders, cities, internal divisions. It was more than unknown lands. Why do so many 19th century buildings seem disproportionate? Enormous doors, very high ceilings, colossal windows, giant stairs. Theory defenders ask, were they built for humans of our height? Why do so many old cities seem to have their first floor buried? In St. Petersburg, Edinburgh, many European and American cities, there are ground floors that became basements, gradual soil accumulation, or something faster. Why are there so few records of the construction process? For some of the most impressive 19th century buildings, there's less documentation than we'd expect. Vague plans, few worker records. I'm not saying Tartaria as described by theorists existed. I'm saying there are anomalies in 19th century history that the official narrative doesn't explain well. Maybe the explanation is mundane, maybe there's an extraordinary explanation. What interests me about Tartaria isn't the most extreme theory, it's the pattern. Atlantis, erased, considered myth. Lemuria, erased, considered fantasy. Tartaria, erased, considered just a name. Druidic knowledge, destroyed by Rome. Gnostic texts, burned by the Church. Library of Alexandria, lost. There's a pattern of erasure. Lost civilizations, suppressed knowledge, rewritten history. Tartaria may be the most recent example, or it may be collective imagination. But the question remains, how much of our history don't we know? How much was deliberately hidden? In the next video, I'll talk about another lost land, one the ancients said was in the north, from which the blonde gods came, Hyperborea. And that story connects everything we've seen. Did Tartaria exist? As a geographic name, no doubt. The maps prove it. As an advanced civilization erased from history? I have no proof, but I also don't have answers for all the questions. What I know is that history is written by the victors, and empires erase those they defeat. Rome erased Carthage, Spain erased the Aztecs, England erased whoever came before. What if someone erased Tartaria? Not as the most extreme theorists imagine, but as just another inconvenient civilization, another suppressed memory. Ask your own questions. Research the old maps. They're available online. Look at the old buildings in your city and ask, who really built them? Atlantis, the most famous lost civilization in history. Plato described it 2,400 years ago, an island larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, with advanced technology, monumental architecture, immense military power, disappeared in a single day and night, sank into the ocean. Most historians say it was fiction, philosophical allegory. But what if it wasn't? Egyptians, Sumerians, Greeks, Norse all speak of a golden age before the flood. The Americas have civilizing gods who came from the sea. There are inexplicable underwater structures in various oceans. What if Atlantis wasn't a myth? What if it was the source of everything, the origin of the civilizers who appeared worldwide? Plato wrote about Atlantis in two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. The source. Plato says the story came from Solon. Solon was Athens' greatest statesman. He visited Egypt. There, priests of Sais told him about Atlantis, a story from 9,000 years before, that is, about 11,600 years ago, exactly the time of the end of the Younger Dryas. The description. An island in the Atlantic. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules, Gibraltar, concentric circles of land and water, architecture of orichalcum, mysterious metal, giant temples, elaborate harbors, hydraulic technology, an empire that dominated as far as Egypt and Italy. The end. The Atlanteans became arrogant, tried to conquer too much. The gods punished them. In a single day and night the island sank, earthquakes and floods. Nothing remained but an impassable sea of mud. Is there something real behind the myth? The timing, 11,600 years ago, coincides with the end of the Younger Dryas, the exact moment when oceans rose dramatically. Entire coastlines disappeared. Islands sank. If there was coastal civilization, it was swallowed. Underwater structures. Bimini Road in the Bahamas, stone formation that looks artificial. Yonaguni in Japan, underwater structures with perfect angles. Structures in the Gulf of Khambhat, India, possibly submerged cities. Mediterranean, Atlantic, Pacific, anomalies in all of them. The impossible maps. The Piri Reis map, 1513, shows Antarctica's coast, before it was officially discovered, and without ice, as it was millennia ago. Where did this information come from? From older maps, copied from even older ones, from an era when there were global navigators. The gap. Sumerian civilization appears ready around 3500 BCE, writing, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, all at once. Where did this knowledge come from? The Sumerians said the gods taught them. What if the gods were survivors, refugees from an earlier catastrophe? If Atlantis existed, what happened to its people? Scenario 1. Total destruction. Most died in the cataclysm. Some survivors fled in boats, arrived at different shores. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Americas, were received as gods by local peoples, taught what they knew, founded the first civilizations. Scenario 2. Previous colonies. Atlantis had colonies worldwide before the fall. When the mother island sank, the colonies survived. Pre-dynastic Egypt, primitive Sumer, Tiahuanaco, heirs to Atlantean knowledge, gradually declining as memory was lost. Scenario 3. Planned evacuation. The Atlanteans predicted the cataclysm, evacuated knowledge and people to safe locations, the pyramids as time capsules, sacred texts as preservation of wisdom, royal lineages as preservation of blood. The pattern. Any scenario explains the same phenomenon: advanced civilizations appearing from nowhere in various parts of the world, at the same time, with similar knowledge, as if they had the same source. The Americas are particularly interesting. The geography. If Atlantis was in the Atlantic, the Americas would be the most obvious destination for refugees. The Gulf Stream naturally carries from the Caribbean area to Europe, and vice versa. Navigation between Atlantis and Americas would be easy. The traditions. Quetzalcoatl came from the east, from the ocean. Viracocha came from the waters. The Maya spoke of ancestors who came from a sunken land. The Hopi speak of previous worlds destroyed. All point to the same thing: something existed before and sank. The constructions. Pyramids in the Americas and Egypt, megalithic constructions in Peru and the Mediterranean, precise calendars in Mexico and Mesopotamia, as if the same school of knowledge had influenced both sides of the ocean. The hypothesis. Atlantis was the center. The Americas and the Old World were the peripheries. When the center sank, the peripheries preserved fragments, each in their own way, all remembering the lost source. If Atlantis existed, its legacy is everywhere. In myths. The universal flood, memory of the cataclysm, the civilizing gods, memory of the survivors, the promise of return, hope of restoration. In constructions. Pyramids aligned with stars, megaliths we can't replicate, astronomical knowledge impossible for primitives. In traditions. Royal lineages claiming divine descent, secret societies guarding knowledge, sacred texts with layers of hidden meaning. In science. Geology confirms there was cataclysm 11,600 years ago. Archaeology finds civilization is older than we thought. Oceanography discovers there are strange structures at the bottom of the seas. The myth of Atlantis may be memory, distorted, exaggerated, mythified memory, but memory of something real, the Atlantean connection, a lost civilization that connects everything: Egypt, Sumer, Greece, Mexico, Peru, all drinking from the same source. Was Atlantis real? We don't know for certain. But something connected the ancient world. Something gave similar knowledge to distant peoples. Something inspired the same myths, the same constructions, the same hopes. Were the Atlanteans the first, or were they also heirs to something earlier? 12,800 years ago, the world ended. A comet, fire, ice, flood. A civilization, or network of civilizations, was destroyed. Almost completely. But not completely. Survivors escaped, carrying what they could, the knowledge, the memories, the skills. They went to Egypt and called themselves the Shemsu Hor. They went to Ireland and called themselves the Tuatha Dé Danann. They went to the Americas and called themselves Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl. They went to Sumer and called themselves the instructors of the Anunnaki. They went wherever they could, and they rebuilt, not what they had before, that was lost, but enough to restart, to teach, to preserve, to leave marks, in the stones of Göbekli Tepe, in the impossible boxes of the Serapeium, in the Sphinx that has looked toward the horizon for 10,000 years, in the texts that say, there were others before us, in the legends of every people that say, there was a flood, and some survived. These are not stories invented to explain the inexplicable. They are memories, memories of a real world that existed, that was destroyed, and that some refuse to let be completely forgotten. We are the heirs of those memories, and the greatest tribute we can pay to those who preserved them is to keep searching, to keep asking, to keep refusing to accept that history begins in 3100 BC, because it doesn't. It begins much earlier, and the fragments of what existed before are still there, in stone, in the ocean, in texts, in myths, waiting for us to be intelligent enough to read what is written. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this documentary changed the way you see the history of humanity, share it. Someone you know needs to see this. Subscribe to keep discovering, because there is much more to come.